Hello and welcome to the Season 1 finale of the Geoffrey Gibson podcast. I am obviously your host Geoffrey Gibson, and today I am going to be talking about The Diary of Anne Frank by Anne Frank. But before I do, I must say that this was the hardest book I have read so far doing this podcast, because reading about what the Nazis did to her and millions of other Jews is fucking disgusting, and no one should be put through hell like that. Anne receives the diary as a birthday gift, hoping it will become the one true friend she has never had. She begins a round of character assessments of her classmates, which I will admit I initially thought was rude, and then remembered to get off my adult high horse and remember vividly how I did the very same at that age. Anne is popular, outgoing, a class clown, a chatterbox, imaginative and a fireball. But Anne is never outwardly serious, and she admits that this is perhaps the reason why she has no real friends. This reminded me so much of me in my teenage years, which I have now thankfully shook off. I am not anyone's entertainment, I am a human being and should be taken seriously. Anne and her family go into hiding above Otto Frank's workplace with the help of Mr. Kugler, Mr. Kleiman, Bep and Mies within the first 25 pages, and the Van Dans join them soon after. Dussel joins the two families halfway through the book. I will admit that I got confused with the names of those who had hid the two families. The Franks concocted a brilliant idea to deflect the suspicions of their neighbors and the relevant authorities. There is a description of the secret annex which I found confusing, and the visual aid provided didn't help either. Despite the precariousness of the circumstances Anne and her family found themselves in, Anne describes her daily life in a way that appears completely normal. The families continue taking their lessons and picking up new ones, which as a reader was bewildering because we know what happens in the end, but, in a sense, I saw it as a quiet defiance of the Nazis and an underlying optimism. Their fear is still a running current as throughout the book there are various instances of burglaries, some that are minor and a few that demonstrate how much danger the families were in and how easily they could get caught. Anne's writing focuses on her inner turmoil, ideals and how she sees her place in the world and in her family. This style of writing completely appealed to me as I'm more character-driven. I much prefer depth of emotion instead of sensory overload, which I'm terrible at keeping track of. She describes her relationships with the residents of the annex and makes various assessments of their character. It is very clear that she and Mrs. Van Daan do not get along at all. You can feel the hatred and the rage in the interactions between not just Anne and Mrs. Van Daan but, also, Mrs. Van Daan and the other residents. She's the textbook Desi auntie that we religiously avoid. Now imagine being stuck in hiding with her and the migraine onslaught. She states during one occasion that she is modest and retiring, which not only displays a terrible lack of logic, which modest person would say that, but a lack of self-awareness too. The first half is mostly disputes between the two families, but, weirdly, I found myself enjoying them as it showed some sort of strange normality. Other than this, Mr. Van Daan isn't often spoken about except for when the pair are arguing, or Mr. Van Daan is making predictions about the war, which Mrs. Van Daan always challenges. In fairness to her, she was quite right until the very end. Anne and her sister, Margot, is a relationship that's hard to explain. There was a sibling rivalry, of course, for the parents' affection, and as Margot was the perfect child, Anne constantly felt dejected and misunderstood. The relationship between mother and child is highly fraught. Anne was taken too seriously when she was light-hearted, or as a joke when she was serious. It is clear that Anne wanted the firm, loving and understanding hand of a mother, whereas Mrs. Frank treated her children like they were friends, which I, personally, didn't agree with. There are plenty of friends to be had but only one mother. Anne was eager to further develop the bond she shared with her father and desired that he loved her for Anne and not just because she was his child. She loved him the most, but, for some odd reason, there was always something lacking. It never developed, and this became a constant source of worry for her. Perhaps, Anne wanted her one true friend to be her father. She wanted much more than he was simply not equipped to give, causing her to become frustrated. Mr. Frank realized that the constant nitpicking was getting too much for Anne, and for her birthday, he wrote her a poem to request Anne to not take their nagging seriously, especially in a place where they're bound to lock heads, which I found really lovely. Peter was hypersensitive, stiff and shy, but curious and rebellious in his own little ways, such as when he stole the book he was forbidden to read. Anne did not like Peter at all first. She found him to be too awkward and uninteresting for companionship. He even used fancy words for the sake of elegance without even knowing what they meant, such as the RSVP gas sign placed in the toilet after having made a bit of a stink. Anne displayed incredible depth of emotion, a highly perceptive nature and a maturity way beyond her 15 years. This book is packed with insight into the human nature, inspiration and optimism. This book is for everyone, man and woman, rich and poor, broken and whole. There is something for everyone to take away from this gem of a diary. I, for one, feel like I've learnt so much from this novel and so much that can be applied in real life. I've spoken about it before. Anne is one of the very few characters, people that I can strongly relate to. I didn't even find anyone I could relate to in Harry Potter, and there's a whole lot of people in there. Maybe a little, very little, bit of Tonks and Harry, but that was about it. I loved this book because I felt like I was reading about myself. This is easily one of the best books I've ever read. I can see a place in my top 3, top 5. After I finished reading this wonderful, heartbreaking book, I was struggling to decide what to read next. Where do I go from here? Thankfully, I reread The Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss, and it served as an excellent pick-me-up. Who needs a tonic when you have Dr. Seuss? I normally try to avoid reading books with a World War II backdrop, but when I read the preview provided by Goodreads, I placed this book near the top of my TBR. I'm glad I waited a little because I needed all the strength I possessed to read this book without breaking down. I only want to read good books from now on, books that I know will interest me or make me laugh. My time is limited. Not every book is for me. I think from now on I'll read historical fiction and non-fiction, women's fiction and non-fiction, recommend feminist texts, please, memoirs and autobiographies, coming of age, YA and new adult, adventure and philosophy. The occasional fantasy and romance here and there. Only here and there. The next books I read have to teach me something, move me and or make me laugh. Anne's Diary did all three. So that brings to an end season 1 of the Book Club. I do hope you have enjoyed our discussions. We will be back for one-off specials before the year ends, and season 2 will begin in January. So until then, thank you so much for listening, stay safe and happy reading.